The first letter wasn't meant to be sent. Clara Vance wrote it because her therapist said writing helped reclaim the narrative. But she knew better. Revenge wasn't about reclaiming. It was about perfecting. The letter began simply, "Dear Daniel," and then unraveled into something that felt more like a curse disguised as grace. She wrote about the way his voice still lingered in her head like a bruise. About how she could still smell the ink of his lies on every word he'd ever published. He was a novelist, after all. A man who believed stories were more powerful than people. So she decided to become the story that ruined him back. Daniel had taken everything that mattered, their love, her trust, and, most painfully, her words. He'd stolen entire passages from her journals for his last book, transforming her private thoughts into his masterpiece. Critics called it a brutal, brilliant dissection of female grief. They didn't know it was literal. They didn't know every wound in his fiction had been cut from her. The second letter came easier. It wasn't an apology, though it began like one. "I forgive you, Daniel. Not because I should, but because forgiveness leaves fingerprints." She didn't sign it. She didn't have to. He'd recognize her syntax anywhere. She mailed it to his publisher, no return address. Weeks later, she saw his interview on late-night television. The host mentioned the mysterious letters from a passionate reader. Daniel smiled, that same lazy half-smirk he'd used whenever he was cornered. "People project their pain onto me," he said. "I let them. It makes them feel seen." The third letter wasn't written in ink. She carved it into the wood of his front door one night, careful, symmetrical strokes. "I see you too." He reported it to the police, of course. But the handwriting expert said it wasn't a match. Clara laughed when she read that. The world had never learned how to read women's handwriting when it was written in fury. By the time she sent the fourth, she'd stopped pretending this was therapy. The letters became art, each one folded inside an unmarked book and mailed to critics, editors, and friends, each one describing a different detail of his theft. Some were obvious, others intimate. She wrote one that ended with the exact sentence he'd used to propose to her. "You make pain sound like poetry." The internet took care of the rest. Within a month, his career was unraveling. Accusations of plagiarism, emotional manipulation, creative vampirism. His agent dropped him. His next book deal evaporated. He tried to explain that the letters were lies. But no one believed him. The world loved a woman wronged. The final letter, she hand-delivered. She found him alone in the cafe where he'd once taken her to celebrate his success. His hands shook when he saw her. "Clara," he said, voice hoarse. "Please. You got what you wanted. You ruined me." She sat down across from him, calm, deliberate. "No," she said, "I rewrote you." From her purse, she pulled an envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was his original manuscript, every page marked with her red annotations. Every paragraph rewritten in her tone. "It's yours," she said. "Or it was. Now it's mine again." When she left, he was still reading, his eyes darting faster and faster as the words began to blur. People said he stopped writing after that he moved somewhere quiet, that he started talking to himself. But Clara never checked. She'd already started her next book, a collection of letters written in her own name this time. The dedication read, "To the man who ruined me. Thank you for the outline." By the second season, the letters had stopped being correspondence and started becoming scripture. Clara Vance had learned how to weaponize silence, the kind that lives between sentences. Her first collection, Letters to the Man Who Ruined Me, Went viral before it was even released. Critics called it an autopsy of intimacy. Women mailed her confessions. Men sent apologies for things she hadn't accused them of. Daniel, somewhere out there, was watching her become the author he'd always pretended to be. But success carries scent, and Daniel always followed what he thought belonged to him. One morning, Clara found an envelope in her mailbox. No stamp, no address. Just a single initial on the back flap, D. She opened it slowly. Inside was a page torn from one of her own books. He'd underlined a line from her preface, "You can love a man and still make him vanish." Beneath it, he'd written in the margin, "Not yet, you can't." Her fingers trembled, but not from fear. More like recognition. He was writing back. Finally. She replied with a single sentence, mailed to his last known address in Brooklyn. "Then come find me before the words due." Weeks passed. No answer. But she began to feel watched, subtly, expertly. Her doorknob slightly turned when she came home. The faint smell of his cologne in the stairwell. A book moved half an inch on her shelf. Daniel had always believed art needed an audience. Maybe haunting was just another way of paying attention. Then one night, she found another envelope under her door. Inside, one of her old journals, the one he'd stolen from years ago. But this time, it wasn't her handwriting filling the last pages. It was his. The entries were dated after the fire that ruined his reputation, entries about her. June 4th, I can still feel her edits in my sleep. June 7th, the words have learned to bite. June 10th, I think I'm becoming her. Clara read every line, her pulse sinking with each sentence. He was unraveling in her syntax, mimicking her phrasing, losing himself inside her rhythm. She realized the perfect symmetry. He'd stolen her voice once to make himself immortal. Now her voice was what was consuming him. She wrote one final letter, not to him, but for him. The paper was soaked in the faintest trace of his cologne, her pen strokes precise and slow. You wanted to be remembered, Daniel. You are. Every time someone quotes me, they breathe you in. I've made you permanent the way fire makes light. I've burned you into the air. She sealed the envelope and left it unaddressed, unmailed. Placed on her desk beside her unfinished manuscript. That night, she dreamed of his hands, ink-stained. Trembling, trying to erase her words from his skin. In the morning, the letter was gone. In its place, a single page lay on the desk, the handwriting not hers. Not his, something in between. It read, "You didn't ruin me. You rewrote me." When she touched the paper, the ink was still warm. By the third year, Clara Vance had become the ghost of her own creation. The letters were now studied in universities. Dissected by people who mistook pain for literature. Women quoted her lines at readings, tattooed her sentences onto their ribs. Recited her fury like prayer. The world believed she'd healed. They didn't understand she'd only refined her violence. Revenge had turned into reputation. And reputation, she'd learned, was the most addictive form of grief. Then came the symposium in London. They'd invited her to speak on authorship and trauma. As if one could ever exist without the other. When she arrived at her hotel, there was an envelope waiting at the front desk. No name. No sender. She didn't need one. The handwriting was elegant, almost tender. His. Inside, a single sheet of paper and a pressed black rose. The note read, "Your words have teeth. Mine still have your pulse." She tore it in half, but that night she couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room looked like him, refined, patient, waiting. Around 3 a.m. The fire alarm went off. Smoke filled the corridor, thick and familiar, but there was no fire. Only the smell of burned paper and cologne. On the floor outside her door, she found a charred scrap of one of her letters. The ink blistered but legible. I forgive you enough to haunt you. She left London early, but the letters kept finding her. They came tucked into her books at signings, slipped under her door, appearing in drawers she hadn't opened in years. Each one written in a voice that wasn't quite his anymore. It was changing, echoing hers, looping phrases she'd once used to destroy him. He was mimicking her again, but this time the imitation felt perfect, invasive, devotional. One evening, she caught her reflection in the window as she wrote a reply. Only it wasn't her reflection, it was him, sitting across the table, copying her movements. Every time she lifted her pen, his hand moved too. Every word she wrote appeared on the glass in reverse, spelled out by his hand. You made me, Clara, the reflection wrote. Now let me finish you. The next morning, she found the glass cool again, blank. Except for one fingerprint in the condensation, hers or his, she couldn't tell. She tried to write an ending, but each page rewrote itself overnight. Her handwriting bent into his, her phrasing softened into the way he once spoke her name. Her editor called to ask about her new manuscript. Clara said she hadn't written one. The editor laughed. Then who's been sending these chapters? They're brilliant. It's like your voice, but split in two. That night, she sat at her desk and reread the last surviving letter, the first one she'd ever written to him. Dear Daniel, I'm still learning what I became when you broke me. She looked at her reflection again and whispered, so what am I now? From the darkness, his voice came back, softer than smoke. You're both of us. In the morning, her typewriter was still warm. A page half finished in words neither fully hers nor his. At the bottom, the closing line pulsed like a heartbeat. Yours truly, the man who ruined me, by the fourth winter. The line between Clara and Daniel had collapsed into syntax. Every sentence she wrote carried both their fingerprints. Critics praised her dual-voiced prose, unaware that the second voice wasn't metaphorical. She'd stopped signing her books as Clara Vance. The new ones came credited to C.D. Vance, initials that meant nothing to her readers but everything to the ghost that shared her body. Her success had become eerie, unstoppable. The latest book, a hybrid of memoir and letters, was titled The Man I Invented to Ruin Me. It outsold everything she'd written before. Reviewers called it transcendent, self-aware, an act of possession disguised as literature. They were right, though not in the way they thought. The sentences rearranged themselves every time she tried to proofread them. Lines she didn't remember writing appeared in his tone, his cadence. One night, she caught her reflection mouthing words a few seconds before she spoke them. She froze, whispering, "Who's writing who now?" The reflection smiled, patient and calm. "We stopped keeping score when you started using my commas." After that, she began hearing him in the mechanical clicks of her typewriter, soft, deliberate, breathing between keystrokes. Each page she pulled free was warmer than the one before. As if the paper itself were exhaling. She didn't destroy them this time. She stacked them carefully, page after page, watching her life become the archive of something that wasn't entirely hers. The letters resumed too, but now they came from her own address. Every few weeks, an envelope arrived in her mailbox, sealed with her handwriting, her stamp. Inside, a message she had no memory of writing. Some were love letters, others threats. You ended me, so I could finish you. We're just punctuation now, waiting for the next breath. One arrived soaked in rainwater, the ink running like tears. You wrote your way out. I stayed to keep the story warm. Then came the night she was invited to a live interview about her work, a celebration of her career, 10 years since the first letter. The studio lights were hot, the air dry, the audience breathless. When the host asked, "Who is Daniel to you now?" she smiled the way she used to before a final paragraph. "He's the sentence I never stop ending." The lights flickered once. The teleprompter glitched. Across the screen, words began typing themselves. "I'm not over yet." The audience laughed, thinking it was part of the act. Clara didn't. When she returned home, her manuscript was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly, the ink still fresh. It read, "You've written me alive, Clara. You can't edit me out anymore." She stood by the window, the city glowing faintly below, and whispered into the glass, "Then take what's left." Her reflection answered, not in words but in breath. The window fogged, and on the mist appeared two signatures overlapping perfectly. Clara Vance, Daniel Vance. The next morning, her publisher received a final submission, an untitled manuscript, written in alternating voices that ended mid-sentence. The cursor frozen where two people had stopped trying to separate themselves. The last words on the page, "I forgive us." By the fifth and final year, the world no longer asked who Clara Vance was. It asked what she had become. Her name was still printed on book covers, yes. But when people read her words, they swore they heard two voices whispering through the lines, one soft, one steady, perfectly interlocked like breath and echo. The academics called it narrative dualism. The believers called it possession. The few who knew the truth, those who had loved her or feared her, called it marriage by language. The new book arrived posthumously, though no one knew she'd died. It was titled Letters to the Man Who Became Me. The publisher claimed it was found in her study, pages stacked neatly on her desk. The last chapter still warm when discovered. It wasn't written in ink, it was printed in heat. The text faintly embossed into the paper as if burned there by invisible fingertips. The opening line read, "I don't write to Daniel anymore. I write through him." The book was fragmented, alternating between tenderness and threat, confession and command. It told of a woman who had merged with the man who ruined her, who had turned his theft into theology. The letters were written in a strange tense, half memory, half prophecy. In one, she wrote, "He took my words, so I took his mouth." Now every sentence ends where our bodies blur. When the book launched, the first edition sold out in days. The critics called it transcendent again, claiming the prose itself seemed alive. They weren't wrong. Those who read it reported strange things, the sound of typing behind them. When they were alone, the faint warmth of the pages as if exhaling. Whispers surfacing between paragraphs that weren't there the first time they read them. Weeks later, the publisher received a final envelope, no return address, sealed with black wax. Inside, a single letter, handwritten in a style that looked like two people taking turns. Mid-word, it read, "There was never a Clara and a Daniel. There was only the story, practicing how to breathe." Below the line were two fingerprints pressed in opposite directions, one smudged with ink, one with ash. The office burned down the following night. No cause was found. Only the manuscripts survived, untouched, smelling faintly of paper, smoke, and something almost human. Now, when readers open her books, the first page flickers faintly in the light, an optical illusion, they say. Some swear they can see her name changing, letter by letter. as if trying to decide who wrote it. Others claim if you read the final line out loud, the air warms, and two voices speak it at once, calm and eternal. He ruined me so I could write him. I wrote him so we'd never end.